Buy yourself a real boat." His words, dripping with the kind of disdain only old money can perfect, echoed across the water. From the shaded deck of his gleaming yacht, the Sterling, he and his guests laughed as the saltwater-soaked bills he'd tossed down stuck to the grimy floor of my rusty workboat. I was just a piece of local color for his vacation story, a tool to be used and discarded. A week later, that humiliation still burned like acid as I was spearfishing for my dinner near the western Sambo Reef, just trying to forget. That's when I saw it. A glint of dark metal where only coral should be, wedged deep in a brain coral formation. It was a chest, ancient and bound in corroded iron, a dead weight of secrets that had no business being there. It seemed to hum with a strange, impossible energy. Would you have the courage to get closer? Subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. My name is Caleb Vance, but everyone who knows me, everyone who's seen the salt etched into the lines around my eyes, just calls me Cal. I'm 38 years old, and for every single one of those years, this island, Key West, has been my home. I'm what they call a conch, third generation. My grandfather ran a charter boat for Hemingway, or so the story goes, and my father spent his life pulling lobster traps from the patch reefs. The sea isn't in my blood, it's the blood itself. It's my office, my church, and my oldest enemy. My boat, the Sea Dog, is a 25-foot testament to survival. Her hull is a patchwork of fiberglass repairs. Her engine coughs to life like an old man waking from a nap, and the rust on her rails bleeds orange tears down her sides. She isn't pretty, but she's honest. She's paid for. And out here, 10 miles from shore with nothing but the horizon for company, she's the only thing I can truly count on. But back on land, it's a different story. On land, a man isn't measured by his knowledge of the currents or his ability to read the sky. He's measured by the shine on his deck shoes and the size of his engine. And by that measure, I've always come up short. Humiliation isn't a single event. It's not one moment, one sneering comment from a tourist on a yacht. It's a slow drip erosion of your soul. It's 1,000 tiny cuts. It's Mr. Davies at the harbor master's office, peering over his glasses at me, his lip curled just so. "Vance," he'd sigh like my very presence was an inconvenience. "The Sea Dog is an eyesore. You're bringing down the aesthetic of the marina." He'd say this while just 2 slips down, a 40-foot sport fisher with a name like Not Working was leaking diesel into the water. Its owner, a snowbird from New York who paid his slip fees a year in advance and was therefore untouchable. I was the eyesore. My honest work, my heritage, it was an aesthetic problem for him. It's the looks you get at the fish market when you bring in your catch. The owner, a man named Silas who inherited the business, would weigh my grouper and snapper with a look of profound disappointment. He'd hold up a particularly fine fish, one I'd risked a strong current to spear, and say, just loud enough for the tourists in their Tommy Bahama shirts to hear, "Shame it was caught by such a rustic operation. I'll have to knock $1 a pound off." Rustic, that was his word for me, for my life. A polite way of saying poor, dirty, and unimportant. Each time it felt like a slap, a reminder that I was just part of the scenery, a background character in their more important lives. The incident with the man on the Sterling, the one who threw the money at my feet, that wasn't the start of it. It was just the loudest note in a long, sad song. It was the moment all those little cuts bled at once, and the shame burned hotter than the midday sun. That burn followed me for a week. It was a ghost sitting on my shoulder, whispering Mr. Davies's condescending sighs and Silas's insults into my ear. I couldn't shake it, so I did the only thing I knew how to do. I went to work. I took the Sea Dog out to the western Sambo Reef, a place the big charter boats usually ignore. It's a trickier spot, known for its unpredictable currents, but the fish are better, and more importantly, it's quiet. Out there, the only judgment comes from the sea itself. I anchored, geared up, and rolled backward into the blue. The moment I was submerged, the world went silent. The noise in my head, the echoes of laughter from that yacht, they all faded away, replaced by the gentle crackle of the reef and the sound of my own breathing. This is my world. Down here, I'm not rustic Cal Vance. I'm a predator. I'm part of the ecosystem. My movements were fluid, practiced over a lifetime. I was stalking a big hogfish, moving slowly along a deep coral ledge. The sun was filtering down through 60 feet of water, creating those dancing patterns of light that underwater photographers love. It was a day like any other, a day of hunting, of solitude, of trying to make enough to pay for fuel and maybe a beer at the end of the day. It was a day of forgetting. But the ocean, she has a funny way of making you remember. As I lined up my shot on the hogfish, a flicker of light caught my eye. It wasn't the silver flash of a barracuda or the iridescence of a parrotfish. This was different. It was a hard, metallic glint, coming from deep within a massive brain coral formation, a place where no light should be reflecting. It was wrong. Everything on a reef has a purpose, a place. This glint was an intruder, an anomaly. My heart started to beat a little faster, a different rhythm than the slow, steady beat of a diver at work. I forgot about the fish. I forgot about the rent, about Mr. Davies, about the man on the yacht. All I could see was that sliver of unnatural light, a secret tucked away in the coral. It could have been anything, a piece of a modern wreck, a lost anchor, a beer can from some careless boater. But it didn't feel like trash. It felt ancient. It felt heavy with secrets. What would you have done? Ignored it and gone about your day? Or would you feel that pull, that irresistible need to know what the ocean was hiding? Let me know in the comments if you would have had the courage to swim closer. And make sure you subscribe, because what I found there changed everything. I hung there in the water, suspended between the surface world and this impossibility. My heart was a drum against my ribs, a frantic rhythm that didn't belong in the calm of the deep. 1,000 rational thoughts tried to take over. It's a tackle box. It's a piece of debris from a hurricane. It's nothing. But my gut, the part of me that understands the language of the sea, knew better. This was old. This was important. The hogfish was long gone and I didn't care. My hunt was over, but a new one had just begun. I kicked slowly, cautiously, toward the brain coral. The glint resolved itself into the hard edge of a dark, rectangular shape. It was wedged in there so tight, the coral had grown around it, embracing it, hiding it. It looked like a fossilized secret. I reached out a gloved hand and touched the exposed corner. The cold was immediate, a deep, dense cold that felt different from the surrounding rock. It was metal, pitted and scarred by centuries of salt water. I ran my fingers along its edge, feeling the rough texture of corrosion. It was a chest, about the size of a footlocker, maybe a little bigger, bound with thick iron straps that were more rust than metal now. I tried to push it. Nothing. It was like trying to shove a mountain. It was part of the reef. I surfaced, breaking into the bright, noisy world with a gasp. The air felt thin in my lungs. My mind was racing, a chaotic storm of questions. How did it get there? What was in it? And the biggest question of all, how in the hell was I going to get it out? I scrambled back onto the Sea Dog, my hands shaking slightly as I pulled off my mask and fins. I looked around my boat, my life, a collection of old tools, rusty but reliable. A 10-pound crowbar, its end worn smooth from years of prying things loose. A coil of thick, salt-stiffened rope. A small hand winch bolted to the stern, meant for pulling lobster traps, not treasure. This wasn't a salvage operation. This was a one-man, back-alley heist against the ocean itself, and I was completely, terrifyingly alone. A part of me, the sensible part, the part that paid bills and worried about fuel costs, told me to forget it. Just leave it. It's been there for centuries. It can stay there for a few more. Reporting it would mean it gets taken by the state, a footnote in some maritime museum I'd never be able to afford a ticket for. But the other part of me, the part that had listened to a rich man's laughter echo across the water, that part was screaming. This was a chance, a single, insane, once-in-a-lifetime chance. I didn't even stop to think it through. Action was the only thing that could quiet the noise in my head. I pulled on a fresh tank, grabbed the crowbar and a heavy-duty hammer from my toolbox, and rolled back into the water. The second descent was different. The wonder was gone, replaced by a grim determination. This was work now, hard work. The physics of it were a nightmare. Every swing of the hammer was like moving through molasses. The water stole half the force of every blow. I positioned the crowbar into a tiny crevice between the chest and the coral. I braced my feet against the reef and pulled. Every muscle in my back and shoulders screamed. The veins in my neck stood out. Bubbles exploded from my regulator in violent bursts. For a full minute, nothing happened. The chest was an immovable object, a monument to futility. My lungs started to burn. Doubt, cold and sharp, pierced through my adrenaline. This was stupid. I was going to hurt myself, break my equipment for a box that was probably full of sand. I was about to give up, to let the ocean keep its secret. But then I saw his face, the man on the Sterling, his smug, condescending smirk. I heard his words, "Buy yourself a real boat," and a fresh surge of rage, pure and hot, flooded through me. I let out a muffled roar into my regulator and gave one last, desperate heave. There was a deep, groaning crack that I felt more than heard, a vibration that ran up the crowbar, through my arms, and into my teeth. The chest shifted, maybe an inch, but it moved. It was possible. A wild, electric thrill shot through me. It was possible. I worked for what felt like hours, which, in the compressed time of a dive, was probably only 45 minutes. I'd surface, swap tanks, and go right back down, ignoring the exhaustion setting into my bones. I was a man possessed. I found a new angle, wedging the crowbar underneath, using a smaller piece of coral as a fulcrum. I hammered and pried, my knuckles scraping raw against the reef. The water around me filled with a white cloud of coral dust. I felt a pang of guilt, damaging this ancient structure, but it was being drowned out by obsession. I had to know. With each tiny shift of the chest, my heart hammered harder. I was uncovering it, bit by bit. I could see more of its surface now. The wood was dark, almost black, and impossibly dense. The lock wasn't a lock at all, but a complex-looking clasp of layered iron fused into a single lump of rust. This wasn't some Spanish treasure chest from the movies. It was cruder, older, more brutal-looking. It felt dangerous. As the sun began to sink, casting long, distorted shadows across the reef, I knew I was running out of light and energy. My body ached in ways I didn't know it could. I was on my last tank of air. I had managed to free one entire side of it, but it was now settled heavily on the sandy bottom, still partially trapped by the overhanging ledge of coral. It was too heavy to lift, too awkward to drag. I needed a new plan, more equipment. I needed lift bags. I'd have to leave it for the night and come back tomorrow, praying no one else would stumble upon it. But I couldn't leave without one last try, one more pull. I jammed the crowbar deep underneath the freed corner, getting as much leverage as I possibly could. I planted my feet, took a deep breath, and threw every ounce of my being into it. My vision tunneled. The sound of my own breathing was a hurricane in my ears. The metal bar bent under the strain. The chest groaned again, a sound like a dying beast, and scraped against the rock. It tilted, rising a few inches from the sand, water swirling around it. For one breathless second, I felt its true weight, a dead ancient gravity pulling against me, a weight of forgotten history. I was 60 feet down, alone with a secret the world had forgotten, my muscles on fire, my lungs screaming for air. Everything I was, and everything I wanted to be, was focused on this single moment of effort. You're there, in the deep, the silence pressing in, with a choice that could change your life or end it. You feel that impossible weight in your hands. Would you have the courage to pull? Would you risk it all for the unknown? Let me know, and make sure you subscribe, because what it took to finally get that chest to the surface was only the beginning of the fight. The night I got the chest back to my shed was the longest of my life. The little wooden building, usually smelling of salt, diesel, and fish, was now filled with something else. The scent of the deep ocean, of wet ancient wood, and of my own sweat. The chest sat on the concrete floor under a single bare bulb, a dark, malevolent-looking thing. It wasn't treasure. It was a tomb. I had to get inside. The lock was a fused knot of iron and rust, a problem that no key would ever solve. So I turned to the only tool I had that spoke a language of pure brute force, my angle grinder. I pulled on my goggles, took a deep breath, and hit the switch. The scream of the grinder filled the small space, a high-pitched shriek of metal on metal. Sparks flew in a brilliant, fiery cascade, illuminating the shed in strobing flashes. The smell of ozone and hot rust was thick, acrid. It was like performing surgery on a monster. I worked for an hour, my arms vibrating, my teeth clenched, until finally, with a groan of tortured metal, the last of the clasp gave way. The grinder fell silent. The only sound was my own ragged breathing and the frantic pounding in my chest. The lid was still sealed shut by the pressure of the depths and centuries of corrosion. I wedged the crowbar into the seam I'd created and put my entire weight on it. There was a sickening sucking sound, a final exhalation of stale, trapped air, and the lid scraped open. I peered inside, my flashlight beam trembling. My first feeling was crushing disappointment. There were no gold doubloons, no glittering jewels. All I saw was a mass of dark, rotting fabric, something that looked like oilcloth, covering a series of lumpy, indistinct shapes. The smell hit me then. Not the clean smell of the sea, but the musty, earthy scent of decay, of time itself. My heart sank. It was just junk. Rocks, maybe. Ballast. All that work, all that risk, for nothing. But my hands moved on their own, reaching in, pulling back the rotted cloth. It disintegrated in my fingers, turning to black dust. And then I saw it, the first piece. It was cool and smooth in my hand, heavy. It was a small figure carved from a deep, luminous green stone. A man with an elaborate headdress, his face a mask of serene, alien intensity. It wasn't Spanish. It wasn't European. It looked like something from a museum exhibit about the Aztecs. My breath caught in my throat. I carefully lifted out another object. A blade about 8 inches long, made of polished black glass that seemed to drink the light. Obsidian. I ran my thumb near the edge. It was still lethally sharp. Then another piece, and another. Gold ornaments, shaped like serpents and suns, hammered with a skill that was both beautiful and terrifying. A heavy gold gorget, meant to be worn around the neck, depicting a snarling jaguar. This made no sense. This was pre-Columbian treasure. Aztec, maybe Mayan. What in God's name was it doing in a Spanish-style chest in a wreck off the coast of Key West? I knew I was out of my depth. This was bigger than a lucky find. This was history, a puzzle that didn't fit together. I needed an answer, but I couldn't trust anyone. For a week I barely slept. I kept the chest hidden under a pile of old nets, my mind racing. Finally, I chose the smallest, most insignificant piece, a gold pendant the size of my thumb, and made the 2-hour drive to a discreet appraiser in a back alley shop in Miami, a man rumored to deal in artifacts with questionable paperwork. I told him it was a family heirloom from my great-grandfather. He took it, placed a jeweler's loupe in his eye, and went silent. The silence stretched for a full minute. He put the pendant down, took the loupe out of his eye, and looked at me. His hands were shaking. "Where?" he said, his voice a dry whisper. "Did you say you got this?" I stuck to my story. He just stared at me, his eyes wide. He told me the piece was authentic, late-period Aztec, circa 1500. He said its craftsmanship was museum quality, and its value, just that one small piece, was easily $250,000. He then looked at me and asked if there were more. I just shook my head, my mouth too dry to speak. He leaned forward. "If this is part of a larger collection," he said, "what you have is not a discovery. It's a nation's treasury. We're not talking about thousands. We're talking about millions. Conservatively, $100 million. $100 million. The number didn't even sound real. It was a concept, an abstraction. I drove back to Key West in a daze, the world outside my truck window looking blurry and unreal. The first thing I did wasn't glamorous. I went to the bank and, through a specialized broker the appraiser had connected me with, I sold that one small pendant. The money appeared in my account a few days later. It was more than I had made in the last 10 years combined. The next day, I walked into the harbor master's office. Mr. Davies was there, peering over his glasses. He opened his mouth to make his usual comment about the sea dog. Before he could, I dropped a stack of $100 bills on his counter. "That's for my slip fees," I said, "for the next 10 years. He stared at the cash, then at me. His mouth opened and closed like a fish. For the first time, he looked at me not as an inconvenience, but as a puzzle he couldn't solve. A week later, I walked into Silas's fish market. He was busy telling some tourists how he only buys from the most professional operations. I walked past him straight to the live lobster tank and pointed at the biggest one in there, a 10-pound monster. "I'll take that one," I said. Silas turned, a sneer already forming on his lips, but it froze when he saw me. I paid for it with another crisp 100 and told him to keep the change. The look on his face, that mix of confusion, envy, and dawning realization, was worth more than the lobster. But the best moment came a month later. I used a fraction of my newfound wealth to buy a boat. A real boat. A 48-foot custom-built fishing vessel with twin diesel engines and a hull the color of the deep sea. I named her the Answer. I sailed her out of the marina, right past the slip where the Sterling was docked. The owner was on his deck, entertaining guests, just like before. He saw me. He saw my boat. Our eyes met across the water. I didn't smile. I didn't wave. I just gave him a slow, deliberate nod. His jaw tightened. The laughter died on his lips, and in his eyes, I saw the one thing my money couldn't buy but had given me all the same. Respect, born from pure, unadulterated shock. I had won. But sitting on a fortune that history couldn't explain, a treasure that shouldn't exist, the real questions were just beginning. What would you do if you were in my place? Sell it all and disappear, or try to solve the impossible mystery of how it got there? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. That nod I gave him, the owner of the sterling, it wasn't about revenge. Not really. Revenge is a hot, messy thing. This was cold. It was the quiet satisfaction of a debt being settled, an equation being balanced. In that single, silent exchange across the water, I saw the world pivot on its axis. He was no longer the man on the yacht, and I was no longer the poor diver in the rusty boat. We were just two men with expensive toys, but only one of us knew the true, impossible weight of the ocean's secrets. That moment was the end of one story, my old story, but it was just the beginning of the real one. Because having the money is one thing. Figuring out how to live with it and with the questions it brought is something else entirely. The Miami appraiser, the one with the shaking hands, became my reluctant gatekeeper to this new world. He knew he'd stumbled into the find of a lifetime, and he also knew that a collection this contradictory couldn't just be walked into Sotheby's. It would be confiscated, studied for decades, and I would end up with a finder's fee and a prison sentence for not reporting it. So, we moved in the shadows. He connected me to a network of private collectors, the kind of people who don't ask about provenance because they value the art, the history, and the secrecy above all else. Billionaires who build private museums in their basements. The transactions were surreal. I'd meet a man in a Geneva hotel suite who would spend $10 million on the obsidian blade and the Jaguar Gorget without blinking, his only concern being the logistics of getting it to his vault. Another meeting on a private jet, flying somewhere over the Atlantic, where a woman with eyes as old as the artifacts themselves purchased a series of jade figures. Each piece I sold felt like letting go of a piece of the mystery, but it was replaced by a number in an account that grew so large it became meaningless. 10 million, 30 million, 60, 90. When the last piece was sold, the total was $107 million. 107 million. I wrote the number down on a piece of paper in my new, sterile waterfront condo, just to see what it looked like. It looked like a lie. It was a fortune built on a historical impossibility, a ghost ship's treasure. With that kind of money, the world doesn't just change, it bends to your will. The first thing I did was buy the entire block of marina slips where the Sea Dog used to be an eyesore. I didn't evict anyone. I just sent a notice to all the slip holders, including Mr. Davies's prized snowbirds, that the annual fees were being cut in half, effective immediately. Davies himself I kept on as harbor master, but with a significant raise and one new condition. He had to personally wash and wax the Sea Dog once a week. I kept my old boat moored in the best slip, right at the front, a monument of rust and peeling paint. It was my reminder. It was my anchor to the man I used to be. As for Silas, the fish market owner who called my work rustic, I bought the market. I walked in one Tuesday morning, made his parent company an offer they couldn't refuse, and by noon, he was packing his things. I promoted the kid who cleaned the floors to manager and told him to pay every local fisherman, no matter how small their boat, 10% above market rate. The word got around Key West pretty fast. I wasn't just the lucky diver anymore. I was a force. People who used to look through me now couldn't meet my eyes. The whispers weren't of ridicule, but of awe and fear. They didn't understand where the money came from, and that confusion was my new armor. But in the quiet of the night, in my glass house overlooking the water, none of it mattered. The boats, the respect, the fear. It was all a distraction from the question that burned in my mind, a question worth more than all the millions. Where did that chest come from? I spent a fortune hiring private historians, rogue archaeologists, and deep-sea salvage experts. They all came back with the same answer. It's impossible. The chest was Spanish 16th century, consistent with the wrecks of the 1715 treasure fleet that sank in a hurricane. But the contents? They were pure Aztec, from the heart of the Mexican Empire. There is no historical record of the Spanish packing Aztec relics in their own chests for transport. They melted everything down. Gold was bullion, not art. And the obsidian blade? That was a ceremonial weapon, something a priest would use, not cargo. It was as if someone had packed a bag from a completely different reality and dropped it into our ocean. The theories were wild. Was it a secret gift from an Aztec noble to a Spanish official? A rogue conquistador with a love for art, smuggling his own private loot? Or something else entirely? That's what I do now. That's my real work. The answer: my new boat isn't for fishing. It's a state-of-the-art research vessel. I have multi-beam sonar, a remote-operated vehicle, and a team of the best divers money can buy. Every day we go back to that reef system. We're not looking for more gold. We're looking for the wreck. We're looking for the source of the impossibility. Because finding one chest is luck, but a wreck that doesn't belong, a ship that history has no record of, that's a legacy. That's the real treasure. Sometimes I wonder if I was meant to find it. A third-generation conch, a man of the water, pushed to his breaking point by the arrogance of the outside world. Maybe the ocean knew I was the only one who wouldn't just see the gold. Maybe it knew I'd be haunted by the story. The money fixed my life, but the mystery gave me a purpose. I'm no longer just trying to survive. I'm trying to understand, and I can feel it, out there in the deep blue, that the answer is waiting. There is more. I know it. Why else would that chest be there, in that specific spot, waiting for someone like me to find it? It feels less like a coincidence and more like a key, left in a lock for centuries, just waiting for the right hand to turn it. So I ask you, sitting there watching this, what do you think? Do you believe a turn of fate this sharp is even possible? Could the ocean serve up that kind of justice? And the bigger question, the one that keeps me awake at night, what's your theory? How does a Spanish chest full of Aztec treasure end up on a reef in the Florida Keys? Was it pirates, a secret expedition, or something far stranger? Let me know your theory in the comments below. I read every single one. And if you want to follow this journey and see what we find next out on that reef, make sure you subscribe to the channel. Let me know where in the world you're watching from, because this story started here in Key West, but I have a feeling the answer is connected to something much, much bigger.